I'm Park Howell, and welcome to the Business of Story.
I thought it was just a stupid picture of a pig in the ocean. But after hearing that story, I had to have it. Now I wasn't just buying a picture, I was buying a story. Story literally made the picture worth more money to me.
That's what businesses are about. People buy brands, people buy stories much more than anything else.
I work with a lot of big enterprise companies, but let's just say I always tell folks, drop the PowerPoint, close your laptops, start with your story.
If you want people to get engaged and you want people to act, you have to tell them an emotionally powerful story. That's with great characters, it's with uncertain outcomes, and it's with high stakes and drama.
All business strategy is a story.
Hello and welcome to Business of Story. Park Howell here, and I'm so glad you're here with me. Now, before we launch into this truly extreme episode of Business of Story, I want you to stop and think about the time you were the most cold. As cold as you have ever been. So bitterly cold that you felt like it was never going to end. So do you have that in your mind? Do you think about that moment? Now I want you to times that by 10, because that's what today's guest has experienced. His name is Robert Swan, and he is the only person ever to trek both the North and South Poles unaided on foot. And he's about ready to return to the Antarctica again this November with another trip, this time with his son Barney. So on today's show, we are going to be talking about extreme leadership storytelling. Now, when Rob first trekked the South Pole in the early 80s, he and his team weathered bitter cold on their trip across Antarctica, only to have their skin nearly burned off and their eyes discolored from the hole in the ozone layer. Then, in the late 80s, following the South Pole trip, he's on his way to the North Pole and almost drowns because he and his expedition started running out of ice to literally walk on. It had melted 4 months too soon. On today's show, Rob reminds us that we don't have to do great things to tell great stories. And he asks, what is your leadership story right now? How is it relevant to the people you are trying to lead? And how do you tell it from their point of view to get them to buy into your quest, to try to achieve their goals, and to help you get through the most extreme leadership challenges? You'll learn the answers to those questions and more as we explore extreme leadership storytelling right now with Robert Swan. Hey, Rob, welcome to Business of Story.
Wonderful to be with you.
I got to tell you, you are my first explorer on the show, and especially my first polar explorer. What on earth compels a man to walk to not one, but both poles of the earth?
Well, when I was 11, I really felt that our world was incredibly negative. So you look back, I'm now 60 years of age, so you look back to the kind of 60s, and we'll all remember that then the Soviet Union and the United States had the ability to blow up our world with missiles up to 3,000 times. And as a kid, I thought, well, isn't blowing up our world once enough? Why do we have enough of these idiots pointing bombs at each other that we can do it 3,000 times? And why? This really got to me as a kid. It upset me. And I remember very clearly watching a film about the great explorers of the Antarctic, Scott, Shackleton from Britain, Peary and Byrd from the United States, Amundsen from Norway, Mawson from Australia. And I watched this film when I was 11. And I thought, wow, there's a place on the planet which is huge, twice the size of Australia, Antarctica, that nobody owns, and there's no people there. There's no bombs pointing at each other. And this just captured my imagination as a kid. And I really did make a decision when I was 11, and my mum, who's 101 and a half years of age, will confirm that I made that decision when I was 11 that one day I would walk in the footsteps of the real explorers to both poles. So it came from a kind of negativity, and not totally positive. It was like me feeling rather lost in a very strange and negative world. That's where it began.
And did you grow up in the UK, or whereabouts were you when you were 11 years old?
I'm a very Englishman, and I grew up in the north of England. I grew up in a family that didn't have a huge amount of money, but we were very lucky to have some land. And so I grew up with a very free, roaming childhood. I was number 7 in a family, and no one cared where I was. So, people would say, well, where's Rob? Well, I haven't seen him for a couple of days. So I was out on rivers and, had that freedom, which I don't think happens enough for young people in today's society, that ability to roam. So I was so lucky, brought up in a great family, and well supported with my dream from day one, I have to say.
And so were you number 7 of 7 kids?
Yes, I was. I was last in the family, tail end Charlie. And as I say, it was a huge benefit because my elder brother, if he'd said to the family, I'm going to walk to both poles, they would have had a nervous breakdown. By the time I came along, I said I was walking to both poles, and they just said, whatever, get on with it. That's the way families go.
Well, we have that in common. I'm number 5 of 7 kids in 9 years growing up in the Pacific Northwest, and had the same kind of upbringing. We were always out in the mountains and the streams and camping and fishing, and it didn't matter if it was raining or not. My mom would say, grab your stuff and get out of the house, and away we went. But I didn't quite make it to the poles, not one or either of them.
Well, that's that. I think you're an excellent chap, and I'm very proud to be on your program.
So tell me, how long did it take from being 11 to when you pulled together your very first expedition and headed down to the South Pole to Antarctic?
Well, obviously, my father, who was a reasonably strict person, said, Rob, it's fine having all this madness, but first you've got to finish school and you really have to go to university, and then it's down to you. So I began this at the age of 21, and we reached the pole when I was 29 years of age. So it took nearly 8 years to raise the money, pull it together, and then execute the journey. What one has to understand is that 30 odd years ago, in order to go to Antarctica, you couldn't fly there, which people now can do. You had to buy a ship, sail to Antarctica, live there on the edge of Antarctica for a year, make your journey to the South Pole, and hope like hell your ship returns in time to collect you. So it was a hugely expensive expedition, $5 million US. Took me 7 years to raise that money in an old warehouse in the East End of London. And that's really when I began to understand the very important leadership link to storytelling, because I realized after being told no for about 5 years, right, where I'd go in, see business women, businessmen, and they just said, Rob, go away. We're not sponsoring you. You've got no credibility. You'll go off. You'll die. We're not sponsoring you. Go away. And I realized something which I think is relevant to today, is that one, you cannot tell a good story on an email. You can't tell a good story in a WhatsApp or a text. You have to go and tell that story in person, and you have to believe in your story. And I just kept going for 7 years, raising that money. And every time I was told no, I would listen as to why people were telling me no. And gradually, by persistence, going to see people, telling the story, getting better at telling that story, eventually I started to turn those very clear no's into yeses. And that will only happen, in my humble opinion, if you go and tell your story face to face. It's very important.
And Rob, what was it that you heard in your story listening when you were hearing all those no's? There must have been a theme that started to ring through that you went, aha, I need to reframe my story to get around this no and turn that into a yes.
Well, first, yes, very much, is that you need credibility. And one of the greatest things that any of your eminent listeners can do to help others is if you get the chance to give anybody some credibility, give it. Because each of us can look back now and say, there was a person once in our lives who gave us the credibility to be where we are today. And I was lucky, after huge persistence, to get the great Jacques Cousteau from France, the great oceanographer, fantastic conservationist, filmmaker. He gave me credibility. It took me, I think, 3 years to get him to be my patron. But first, get credibility. That was the first thing I realized. I couldn't do this with my own credibility. I had to get somebody to kind of give me some credibility. So that was the first thing, that listening, and I obviously developed then the story that Jacques Cousteau was my patron, and you could see people starting to nod. The second thing is that you can often, obviously you have to be persistent. I think persistent counts for more than anything in life. I really do. But occasionally you've got to think, hang on a minute, I'm not doing this in the right way. It's not working. So I realized early on that if you are going down a track, it's worth standing back and saying, am I being relevant? And I suddenly realized that the most relevant thing to sell this, to raise that $5 million over 30 years ago, it's a lot of money today, but how much was it then? It was huge. That I would have to be more relevant to the sponsors. And how I did that was to think, hang on a minute, Scott, Shackleton, all the great explorers 100 years ago, they must have had sponsors. But in those days, they didn't wear baseball caps, have badges on their clothing. So I had to go and find who those supporters were. And there was no internet. There were no mobile phones. There was no Google. There was no, clicking one button and there's the answer. It took me 3 months of research in the British Museum in London. And eventually I had a list. And eventually I was able to go to some sponsors and say, look, you supported Captain Scott and Sir Ernest Shackleton 100 years ago. And they went, what? We didn't know that. Will you please support me now? And that was the breakthrough. Going back in time to go forward. That was how eventually I cracked raising that money.
And they didn't have Red Bull back then to be able to fly their flag from your banner, up on your ship to get you to the South Pole. So you had to become an explorer of just who these sponsors were to get them. And it sounded like you really connected with their legacy. They didn't even realize that they were part of these great expeditions. And so now this was a kind of a legacy story that you were playing into to create your relevance.
Yeah, I completely agree. And then the story took off. You supported Captain Scott. Here's a picture of, your chocolate bar on Captain Scott's expedition. Support me and you can show that your product has lasted 100 years and still is important for us explorers, and bang, game on.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're pulling your sponsors together. How does one get in shape to walk the 700 or 900 miles into either the North or South Pole? What did you do in this time just to pull yourself together so that you knew that you were going to have to deal with this cold? How did you train for that?
Well, it's something I'm doing today as we'll move on to the story. There's obviously, I'm still doing it now. So what we do as I speak is that you've got to be fit, but you've also got to have some weight. Because on the South Pole, a big South Pole expedition, I would lose over 60 pounds in body weight. So you've got to start fit and strong, but you've also got to be carrying extra weight on you, because that's the most efficient way of carrying calories is on yourself. So obviously it's a lot to do with your legs, your thighs, your backside, your lower back, because you're pulling huge weights, 300 pounds on a sled, 9 hours a day, 7 days a week. Your arms are important because you've got your ski sticks, but you don't go into the gym and, pound huge weights. That's the worst thing you can do. It's light weights, high repetition, serious amounts of endurance. At my age now, I spend a lot of time cycling up in the Sierra Mountains where I live here in California. And worst of all, we strap on our harnesses and we pull old tires through trails round the city, the little town I live in here in Auburn, California. So we pull those tires with ski sticks in the middle of summer, and the Americans just really can't understand what's going on when they meet a very red-faced Englishman pounding up some track, pulling a tire with ski sticks, and it's 90 degrees in the plus. So that's how you got to do it: fit, fat, endurance, and obviously mentally, you have to really be thinking, I've got to go and do this, and get your mind round it. That's hugely important. The mind is everything after about 30 days on any big polar journey. It's your mind that will get you to the pole, not your body.
So it is about the story, first and foremost, about survival, to be able to do this, to be the first man to trek to both North and South Poles unaided. And you had to first tell yourself this story that you were going to live into and survive. It's not just prosper from, it's to survive. How do you do that? And how do you also get, as a leader, people to come along with you on what sounds like a really crazy, hair-raising event?
Well, you've got to understand that you need different people, and you would understand this coming from your family of so many children. And I knew this early on in my life, that what upsets me most, I realized from my brothers and sisters, is that when they were criticizing me, they were right. They were right. And I realized early on in life that for any team, you should never have the same people that are like you. If you've got a team of people that all say yes and they all agree to what you're doing, that isn't strong. So I realized very early on that to survive, we would need people with different skills, different backgrounds, different ways of thinking, different ways of doing things, perhaps highly irritating to each other. People that would challenge me, push me, upset me. That would be the way we would survive. So I looked very much for people who weren't like me. I looked for people that were, I'm very positive. I look for negative people. I'd always look for the negative. I'm useless with a detail and attention to detail. So I'd look for people that were very attentive to detail, all pulling together strong, different characters to make this expedition a reality. And how one inspired those people to join you, and I think this is a really important part of life and business, is you have to look at things from other people's point of view. You can't just look at it from your point of view as a leader. You have to say, well, hang on a minute, what's in it for a person to come and walk to the South Pole on our expedition? How am I going to convince this person that there's something in it for them? And actually, the best way to do that is to ask them, like, why would you like to do this? What could this expedition do to help you with your life, your future, your goals, your dreams, etc.? And that worked extremely well. So people would feel a sense of ownership, that people could, really feel that they were truly empowered by me to undertake the mission. So, for example, we have one person to the South Pole, Roger, he will navigate us with no GPS, no radios, no backup. He will navigate us using the sun, a sextant, and a watch, 900 nautical miles to one building the size of a football pitch, the South Pole Scientific Station. And if he screws up, we're dead. So that's a massive operation, a massive thing in itself. And I gave him that mission without looking over his shoulder, without saying, are you going to do this properly? So he felt a real sense of ownership. He would have to get us to the pole, and we would follow his command, his direction. Another person, Gareth, he takes on the logistics. What food are we carrying? How much fuel have we got? Will the skis work? Will the sleds stay together? Will the ski bindings not break? He takes that on. And we, again, trust him. We don't look over his shoulder. That's his department. And my job, get everybody together, go to the Antarctic. And if you think of the ship operations, all of the various aspects of a big expedition, you actually empower people to have that area, which is their area, and they are responsible for it. And as a leader, you're not going to be looking over their shoulders. You actually trust them. Trust will inspire people more than anything to join your team and then deliver. Absolutely.
So you were trekking on your very first expedition. You were heading to the South Pole. You're going 900 miles to get there. What was the one big event? And I imagine there were numerous, but what was the one big event that maybe you thought you were doomed or you thought you weren't going to get there? And how did you three pull together to get through it?
Well, it's a very tough part of the journey. You have to go up the biggest glacier in the world from sea level to 10,000 feet. Remember, you don't have a radio with you, no communications with the outside world. There is no one there. So we go up this big glacier from sea level, 125 miles. And obviously on a glacier, you have crevasses. And if you fall into a crevasse, no one's going to get you out because we didn't carry ropes or ladders because they're too heavy. So we had to navigate through these crevasse fields, up to 6,000 crevasses. And this was a very, very hard time for us. But again, it came through very simply that we had to trust each other. This is what got us through. Because when you're marching to the South Pole and you have no backup, if you run out of food or fuel, the fuel melts the snow to drink. So if you run out of food or fuel, you're dead in 5 days. So we had to keep a good average of 12 miles a day. It doesn't sound much, but trust me, it's a lot. So to keep that average, if we don't keep it, we die. And we're going through these crevasse fields and we can't slow up to have huge debates about where we are and are we going to cross it. We trusted each other's judgment. Had we stopped every time to have a kind of feedback session for every crevasse and some enormous complicated conversation, we would have not held our average of 12 miles a day. So we trusted each other's judgment. Whoever was leading would choose the route, and the others would follow that route unconditionally and without debate. So our tightest, toughest time was overcome by trust, and that trust made us more efficient to keep our vital 12 miles a day average. My suggestion to any leaders is, first, to gain trust, you have to trust yourself. If you don't trust you, who's going to trust you? Second is that trust will mean efficiency. Because if people can get on with what they're supposed to be doing, not talking about it, that makes any team more efficient. And that efficiency got us through the tightest spot of the trip.
And Rob, you assembled then this small team of rivals that you purposely went out and found very accomplished men to help you with this, but didn't always see things your way. Did you ever get a sense of mutiny? Did that ever pull you apart at some point?
No, for the simple reason that there's one very good thing any team can do before launching on a mission, which is do or die in our case, but we're not asking people to go off and do that. But it's a useful thing that before you undertake a mission, just to go round the team and say, look, are we agreed on this issue? Everybody agrees, done. Are we agreed on this issue? Yep, tick. So everybody agrees to the system, to the way we're going to do it, to the communications that we're going to have. And then, of course, on the expedition, people are going to get upset with each other. Just small things can make you want to kill somebody. But if you've agreed on certain basic things, any sort of movement towards mutiny or upset, it's a quite easy thing to do to say to the team, look, remember everybody, we agreed on this is how we're going to do it. And that would kind of head off some of the possible mutiny and upset with each other at the pass rather than having to then deal with it. And I think probably one of the greatest things I've learned is that, often in life, and everybody listening will know this, that sometimes you put off saying something. And if you don't say it, then guess what? It's harder to say it. And then the next time, it's even harder to say it. And then after a while, you can't say it. So what I believe one needs to do is that if something is bugging you or is a problem, say it. And if you say it early enough, you can actually add some humor into saying it. So let's say, one of the members of the team would drink their coffee making a slurping noise. This is fine for a week, but after 2 weeks, definitely you want to put an ice axe through their head every time they're drinking their hot chocolate or coffee in the tent. So rather than just letting it build and build and build, you would make a joke about it in order to break the ice so that person would realize, hang on a minute, I need to do something about this, rather than it building up. So in the middle of the night, we didn't stick an ice axe through the guy's head.
So what you're saying in the boardroom where you've got the elephant in the room, if you don't take care of it right away, that elephant's going to get even bigger. And it's especially large in a tent on a South Pole expedition.
Correct. Get the cards on the table with some humor early.
So what was, you think about the issues that you would run into going out there. How about the really big issue if one of you got hurt? What would you do to protect the other two gentlemen?
Well, that's it. No, once past halfway, remember we're doing 900 nautical miles. So once we reach the halfway point, we decide then to go on or go back. But once past halfway, we can't go back because we'll run out of food and fuel on the way back. So once past halfway, we either reached the pole or died in the attempt. That was the only way home. So past halfway, the rule was agreed before we left that if somebody was unable to walk, they'd be given 24 hours, supported by the others, to get better. If they still couldn't walk after 24 hours, they'd be left at the side of the trail to die. And that was the only way you could do it. The other two would be too weak by that stage to pull the other person on the sled. So it's a pretty good reason not to twist your ankle or break your leg. The only thing that we never decided, because it was too hard to decide, is that did we leave that person food? That was something we never decided. And for myself, I I would have left them food. Although they were dead, no one would have ever found them. But I don't think I would have had the heart just to leave somebody with one biscuit saying, "See you, mate, we're out of here." But we never decided on that. All the other hard choices were made before we left. So past halfway, can't walk, left to die.
So it takes you 70 days, right, for this trek, for your first trek across the South Pole. You arrive on, what, January 11th, 1986?
That's correct.
And you had your boat there, the Southern Quest, but much like Ernest Shackleton, it was being devoured by the ice and literally sunk? Do I have that
correct?
right?
No, we hadn't spoken to anybody for a year. And so we arrived at the South Pole. We were so warmly welcomed by the United States government that do scientific work there. They do great scientific work. And they were so surprised to see us because they hadn't been expecting somebody to walk in. You've got to remember that more people had stood on the moon than had been to the pole on foot. So it was a bit of a shock to them that we arrived and we were standing there, celebrating our success just for 5 minutes. And then we heard over the radio, because the South Pole Station has a radio, that our little ship, Southern Quest, that had dropped us off a year earlier, had returned to the Antarctic to collect us with our own aeroplane on board the ship that was going to fly to the South Pole. But we heard the news that the ship had been devoured, as you say, by the massive ice sheets of the Antarctic and had sunk, wait for it, 5 minutes before we'd arrived at the pole after having spoken to no one for a year. So let's just say this was a bit of a shock. And it was, in a way, probably the making of me, because the most important thing that everybody was safe. And that's all that counts in the end. But this would become, I believe, the making of Robert Swan. At the time, I wasn't thinking that.
And how did you get out? How did you and your men get back?
Well, the most important thing was that we had made a promise. Remember Jacques Cousteau, my patron? Well, he, in return for him giving me credibility, had asked me to make sure that I left Antarctica with no garbage, no rubbish, no equipment left there. So he asked us to clear out our base camp and just leave our footsteps in the snow to respect Antarctica. Nobody owns it. We should look after it. So we'd made a deal with him, a promise to him. The only problem was now we've got 60 tons of equipment on the shores of Antarctica, because remember, we'd lived there in our hut for a year before making the journey. We have no ship. It's sunk. It's 3,000 miles back to New Zealand over the Antarctic Ocean. And also, I'm bankrupt because you can't insure a ship that far south on the planet. And I had told my bank manager that I would sell the ship to pay my debts off. So I had no ship, no insurance. And, it wasn't the easiest day of my life. But the point was, I think, bottom line, leadership is more simple than we make it. I think that all of us as leaders should think carefully before we make a commitment in life. And that could be to our families, our loved ones, our community, our country, our planet, to our job, our work, our colleagues. If you should think carefully before you make a commitment. And once you make it, you should do it. Because no one's going to take you seriously twice if you don't. So we got the team together and said, right, we've got to finish this job. How? First, you cannot leave a base camp in Antarctica, which has the highest wind speeds, the biggest storms on the planet. You have to have somebody at your base or it will disintegrate and blow all over Antarctica. So I asked for 3 volunteers to spend another year in Antarctica. No one's ever paid. And one of those was Gareth, who'd been on our South Pole expedition, walking with us. He volunteered to spend another year. So he'd be 2 years in Antarctica. 2 volunteers joined him from the ship. And I promised Gareth that I would come back a year later with another ship and collect him, his team, remove the garbage, remove the equipment, and deliver on our promise. Our last problem was, how was I going to get the rest of the team from the ship back to New Zealand? So God bless America. I can tell you now, because all of the Navy pilots have either died or retired, but we literally hitched a ride on the back of one of the US Navy Hercules C-130s, and the pilots just looked the other way. We jumped on the back of the plane, hid, flew back to New Zealand, and then we jumped off the plane at the other end, much to the bemusement of the customs officials. But that was how we got back. And 1 year later, we went back, collected the garbage, collected the team. And, that all sounds quite, impressive. But the most impressive bit was that I ended up with a debt of 1.2 million US dollars. And that took me 10 years to repay that debt. That was the extent of our commitment.
Wow. So in all of this, and all of, like Ernest Shackleton's endurance that got destroyed in his quest, you experienced essentially the same thing. Had to go get a ship to come back and retrieve your men and to retrieve the rubbish, the trash that you left behind. In this quest, at any time, did you ever get the sense of Shackleton or Scott or any of these great explorers looking over your shoulder or being there with you in this journey?
Well, absolutely. Every day, I'd grown up as a kid reading their stories, watching the film footage. No, we weren't alone. And there is an absolute phenomenon that many people who've been in extremes, in difficult circumstances, in wilderness areas, they call it the third person. And often this would happen to us, that there were just 3 of us sitting on our sleds, waiting waiting for the person to hurry up and join us when we knew there wasn't anybody else. Or was there? We don't know. But often you had this sense that there was another person with us, and one felt it, and it definitely felt as if Scott, Shackleton, the old real explorers, because let's get this straight, I'm not an explorer, I'm merely a traveler. I think the last great exploration left on Earth is to survive on Earth. That's what I think of exploration. But those real explorers definitely, without a doubt, were looking over our shoulders. They were with us.
Let's cover that here in a minute, because you survive the South Pole, you collect your folks, and you help clean it up, and then you venture to the North Pole and nearly drown in a melting ice cap. So can we cover that journey here after these messages? A few years back, actually it was September 2013, I was at the Arizona Science Center, and I was doing something that I never thought I would do. I was actually on stage following, of all mega stars, Robert Redford. I was there for his Raise the River event. I had this tremendous honor of being asked to be a part of a handful of speakers at this formal dinner, and I was tapped to talk about our storytelling work with the Water Use It Wisely conservation campaign. This is a program that became the largest conservation outreach effort of its kind in North America, and a campaign that's still around after 18 years. Ah, the power of storytelling. Anyway, as I was preparing for the show, my part in it, I told our son Parker about being asked and actually going on after Redford, and he deadpans, "Gee, Dad, that's great. I bet Robert Redford must be excited to open for you." Anyways, I laughed. But I got to tell you about my opening to my speech that night. In fact, it was kind of a confession. I started off by confessing I am the son of a dam builder. Now, it actually got a laugh, thankfully, from a crowd who were there to raise money to help raise the river, that being conservation efforts on the Colorado River. Did you know, in fact, that due to irrigation and human consumption, the Colorado no longer reaches the Gulf of Mexico? It literally dries up in its pass. Anyways, the fact that I was the son of a dam builder and the irony of me speaking at Raise the River just cracked me up. Now, as our guest today, polar explorer Rob Swan has indicated, to truly become an activist about something requires you to experience a life-changing moment firsthand, as he did on his trips to North and South Poles. Well, following my speech at Raise the River, Patagonia came out with a powerful documentary called Damnation. Like most of their stories, Damnation, which is about the changing attitudes of tearing down hundreds of dams in North America to free up rivers, is brilliantly written, beautifully shot, and makes you think, not about Patagonia, but about our current nation of dams and their impact. This documentary is just one story in a line of narratives as long as the Pacific Crest Trail that Patagonia uses to transform customers into brand activists. Other features and videos include Warnware and Unbroken Ground, in addition to their groundbreaking campaign that encourages people not to buy their product with their now iconic "Don't Buy This Jacket" ad campaign, which underscores their commitment to treading lightly while enjoying our planet. If you don't need it, don't buy it. That's their theme. Anyway, Patagonia is not trying to create tree-hugging activists, but sensible-minded customers who place sustainability ahead of satiating a need to consume something. And they've been living this story since their founding in 1973. I know because I had Patagonia's Director of Philosophy, Vincent Stanley, as one of my very first guests here on Business of Story, right after the launch of Damnation. In fact, you can go to the show notes and click on the link to take you to his episode, but when you're done listening to this one. For Patagonia's work in creating activists out of customers through their purpose-driven story marketing, they earned my Story Marketer of the Week award. Since today's show is about the grand adventure of leadership, I've got an adventure for you. So now listen, are you in a leadership role in your organization? If you are, then it means you're doing something right. But have you ever felt like people don't always listen to you? Or you're not as dynamic of a speaker as you'd like to be? You'd like to be closing more deals? Maybe you're missing out on a promotion or two? You're afraid of being humiliated as a presenter? Or worst of all, you think you're boring? Well, what if you could be trained by the top minds in business storytelling through a 6-month deliberate practice program to help you own any room? I'm talking being the commanding presence in the boardroom, break room, chat room, even your living room. Well, now you can join our Storytelling for Leaders deliberate practice program, where over just 6 months, we'll reignite within you the one true superpower we all possess, storytelling, to help you nudge the world in any direction you choose. You will join a small cohort of leaders just like you who will be immersed in this proven Storytelling for Leaders program, coached by Mark Schenk from Anecdote out of Melbourne, Australia, and yours truly from the Business of Story. Now, some people pay upwards of $5,000 to $10,000 per month for story training. Yet Storytelling for Leaders, which is used by such global brands as Microsoft, SAP, Shell, and Yammer, is yours for a one-time investment in your storytelling skills of just $1,250. That's right. That's 6 months of access to the top business storytelling minds and materials for just $1,250. But we have only 5 seats left for our May 26th kickoff, and that's May 26th of 2017. So if you are listening to this show on May 27th, you're too late. It's a full-day immersive Storytelling for Leaders training that launches the entire 6-month deliberate practice program. I hope you'll join us. Just go to the show notes here, and you can click on the link and reserve your seat today. So get your story on and register at businessofstory.com. Welcome back to Business of Story and our amazing guest today, Rob Swan, the only man to walk to both the North and South Poles unaided, and he's about ready to go back to the South Pole again with his son Barney. But before we get there, let's talk a little bit about your adventure to the North Pole and the fact that you and your team almost drowned because of the melting polar cap.
Well, we undertook the North Pole expedition, which is 700 miles in total from the edge of the Arctic. So you go up north of Canada and literally step off ice and snow, but it's above land, onto a frozen ocean. And you walk every step away from land towards the North Pole, which is 700 miles from the nearest land in the middle of a frozen ocean. So we set off, and we had a team of 8 of us from 7 different nations, and we were walking along. It was very hard work. The Arctic is a very rough surface. It's covered in blocks of ice. So we were battling away, but we got 640 miles in, and the only thing we hadn't planned for happened. That the entire ocean melted beneath our feet 4 months before it ever had in history. So the Arctic Ocean melted in April. It was supposed to melt in August. And suddenly we were in a situation where, we were going to die. And again, no one could get to us. No one knew where we are. This was the only thing we hadn't planned for. And it was a massive fight to stay alive and reach the North Pole. A lot of members of our team, 8 of us from 7 nations, became injured. People lost heels. It was a dreadful fight, those last 100 miles to the pole, but we hung on in there and we got there. So on both poles, north and south, I personally, because remember, I went to the South Pole and the North Pole because of history. I went to the South and North Pole because it went down well with girls at parties. I didn't go there to save the...
They do push us to the extreme, don't they?
I went there because it was there, not for any of the reasons I now undertake journeys. So on the South Pole, we had experienced a phenomenon that everybody listening will now know, but we walked under the hole in the ozone layer, which we didn't know was there. The ultraviolet rays came down, reflected off the ice, burnt our eyes out, fried our faces off, burnt the skin away. That was a bit of a shock. And then on the North Pole, we touched what now people, are realizing that, our planet is warming up, and we faced the Arctic Ocean breaking up beneath our feet. So on both poles, we touched something that, fundamentally changed my life. It really did, because I realized that, as I said earlier, the last great exploration wasn't walking to poles. Maybe it was staying alive on this planet and, maybe thinking about people not born yet. So that's where it all changed as we went to the North Pole. That really hit me hard.
And you arrived there on May 14th, 1989, so you were experiencing the effects of climate change or global warming back in the late 80s.
Correct, yes. And, I think that personally, it's a pretty simple thing, actually. I'm not an explorer, right, Park? I'm not an explorer. I'm not a scientist because I'm too stupid. I'm certainly not an environmentalist. I can't stand them. But what I am pretty good at is survival. I'm a good survivor. And a survivor, whether it be in business, whether it be for sustainability and the future of our planet, a good survivor doesn't look at an indication of danger and then ignore it. A survivor actually addresses danger before it becomes real. And we all know it's definite that climate change is happening. It's definite. Science has agreed on it. Ask my mother, who's 101, has the climate changed in her lifetime? Ask any of us. We know it's there. The records are there. It's definite. Now, what isn't definite is, are we causing it all? We don't know that yet. But a survivor is not going to sit having a big debate about, is climate change happening? Should we be doing something about it? A good survivor is going to say, right, let's get on this now and take the right steps to avoid this problem. And actually, it doesn't matter if we're causing it or not. Let's do the right thing just in case we are causing it. And one day we'll find out. But if we carry on arguing about who's causing it, is it happening, it'll be too late. So after having walked to both poles, I realized that that would be, in my own small way, the role I would have to take. Let's take action rather than talking about it. And to make it clear for listeners, let's think of insurance, for example. Most people listening insure their house, their life, their car. They insure maybe their bicycle. And that doesn't mean to say, you're going to die tomorrow, your house is going to set on fire, your car is going to be stolen. No, we insure things just in case. And I believe that's what we all have to think about as far as climate change, sustainability, our planet and its future, is that we need to ensure and do the right thing now when it comes to our energy use of resources, and all the rest of it. It's a survival issue. It's not a green issue.
I hear what you're saying about being a survivor over an explorer, but to me, Rob, you are an explorer of a different sort, and that is the explorer of the extreme capabilities of humans, of what we can actually accomplish, even though we have these very limited views of our world and limited views of ourselves and limited views of the stories that we can live into. And you've demonstrated this by walking, to both poles, and you are about ready to take this on again. You and your son, Barney, this November are heading back. You were heading back. He's going for the very first time back down in the South Pole. Tell us about that, and what is the reason for this?
Well, it wasn't on my list of things to do. Let's be absolutely clear. I'm 60 years of age,
you said, right?
And in my business, you're an old man at 35. Because if you want to know why I was the first person to walk to both poles, it hurts. And it doesn't do your back much good. It doesn't do your hips any good. It doesn't do your knees any good. However, NASA, who I really respect as an organization because they're not emotional, they measure things. NASA have told the world, but most of us missed it, they've told us that the ice caps that surround Antarctica, and let's be realistic here, Antarctica has 90% of the entire world's ice, twice the size of Australia, ice up to 16,000 feet thick at the South Pole. So it's a lot of ice. And NASA have measured the fact that this ice is breaking off faster than even the most pessimistic people thought it might. And I had to respond to that challenge because, people are going to inherit all of this mess, and I'm the sort of person that's got to try. And therefore, that ice is breaking off possibly because we're using, the wrong energy on a global basis, or using too much energy in the wrong way on a global basis. So our challenge is that Barney and I, my son Barney, who will be 23, and myself, will walk 600 miles this time from the other side of Antarctica to the South Pole. But this time, for the first time in polar, Arctic, or Antarctic history, we will survive only on renewable energy. What that means is we're working with NASA. They are producing this fantastic ice melter, which goes directly from solar. We're working with a fantastic Phoenix-based company called Zero Mass, who are making huge steps in creating fresh water direct from solar. Groundbreaking stuff, but they're helping us with some solar thermal technology to again melt the ice to give us hot water to cook and survive. And at the same time, we're working with biofuels, biofuels coming from sources like wood chips, from maggots, from coffee waste, from food waste, from wine waste, because our expedition must run on renewable energy. And our purpose as we walk, yes, 60 days to the South Pole again, we are going to be saying to people quite simply this: we are out there in the most hostile place on earth. We are surviving only on renewable energy. And in a very positive way, we're going to say to people, what are you doing at home about your energy transition? Are you using solar in your life? Have you got a solar panel in your life? Are you using green electric through your utility? Are you thinking about your diet? Are you investing money to have a good, positive impact? Or we're going to give people very, very simple things that they can do about their energy. Have they got a hydrogen car, an electric car, a hybrid car? And we're going to make it really, really easy, and we hope inspirational for people literally to make those changes by a click of a mouse button. I believe that, people know there's a problem on Earth, but they just often aren't inspired with the information to do something about it. As young people say to me of Barney's age, they say, Rob, we don't need any more information. We've got enough. What we need is inspiration. That's what we need. So Barney and I's journey from November the 15th to January the 15th, 2018, starting November 2017, will be, we hope, an inspiration, especially for young people, through my son's story. He's very brave to come with his rather crazy father. It's going to be great that I've got him to look after me. And we're going to make this journey father and son together. It's so important that generations join together. And we hope that we'll be an example of that, father and son together, making this journey. And I promise you, without a shadow of a doubt, this will be my last great big polar journey. And it will have taken me 32 long years to at last have crossed the entire Antarctic continent from one side to the other. Started in all those years ago, and this will be the completion of a very long, rather stupid journey, but I'll be proud of it.
Will that also make you the oldest gentleman to be in the Antarctica?
Oh, yeah.
Are you going to win that?
Yeah, probably the oldest to make that journey. It'll also be I don't really care about that so much. What I want it to be is the first journey to survive only on renewable energy. So people in the future, this is my hope, that people in the future, for climbing mountains, going out into the beautiful wilderness, are actually thinking about how their story can inspire people to use more renewable energy, to use more clean energy, to respect the beauty that we have on this planet.
My final question for you, a lot of our listeners, and especially my students in the Executive Masters for Sustainability Leadership program at Arizona State University, they are explorers in their own right, in that they are trying to enact and sustain change in their large organizations through environmental work, social work, but it's new. These are new stories to these ancient thinking organizations anyways. What have you learned first from your own personal story that gets you up every day and takes on these great quests? And how does that story then feed into your leadership story that recruits the right people on your team to ultimately lead to the grand story of the expedition itself and making things happen? That's my long way of saying, how do you get your personal story drive your professional pursuits, and how can our listeners do the same thing?
What's really important is you don't have to do great things to have a great story. That's the most important thing. To tell a story, you need to practice. You need to get in your mind, how is your elevator pitch? What is your leadership story so far in life? So many people wait to think, well, I've got to have this great thing to tell everybody, but everybody's life has a great story. So start immediately. Stop thinking, oh, well, I've got to do this, I've got to get that, everybody has a fantastic story. Write it down and practice telling it. You cannot tell a good story without practice. Second is that it's important to get, as you move forward, some good moments for that story that link everything together. And one of the things I would say to your students is that obviously our communications from our little tent in the middle of Antarctica are limited. So therefore, when Barney and I get back in March next year, we are heading back to Antarctica on a ship. We've been going every year for 15 years, taking young leaders to the Antarctic, and we take them from all over the world. So one of the things I would say to your business team is come with us. Get on that ship, check out our website, check out our Facebook, and get on that ship, because once you're getting going, you need good additions to your story. So try and find it. If you can't come to Antarctica, think of something else, but gradually build great moments which start to really make sense as to your own leadership story. But don't wait, start now. That's my advice.
And Rob, how do we get on your ship? You're heading down there in November. We can't necessarily be walking along with you. How do we get on your ship?
Well, two things. One is first to follow us on our expedition, Barney and I. That will be on our website, 2041.com. That's numbers 2041.com. Our Facebook page is 2041, and then the word climate force. Climate force. Have a look on the Facebook. So sadly, you can't come and join us walking to the pole, but follow us walking to the pole. Become champions of our campaign called Climate Force, to make those changes, to get a solar panel, to buy green electricity. And any of your younger listeners, they should see what Barney will be saying, because he'll be giving younger people, tasks and simple things they can do on energy. To get onto our ship, the ship sails on the 1st of March from South America, and we'll be going to Antarctica for 2 weeks. We've already taken nearly 4,000 young people, young leaders from all over the world in the last 15 years. So again, you can apply to join that through the website 2041.com. So there's got to be at least 2 fabulous young people who are going to join Barney and I on that ship after we've walked to the South Pole, to then get back home and become champions, make your own dreams come true. And, all the things I've been talking about with you today, it's possible for you to achieve.
And Rob, what is the significance of 2041?
2041 is our long-term mission. I was given this mission by Jacques Cousteau 26 years ago. In the year 2041, 24 years from now, the treaty, remember Antarctica is a place that nobody owns. We all own it. No one can go and destroy it. In 2041, the treaty that protects it could stop. It could be altered. It could be changed. We could be stupid enough to go down there and destroy the last great wilderness left on Earth. So our long-term mission is to protect Antarctica, and we're asking people to build up towards making that happen in 2041. And our short-term mission is for us to survive on Earth between now and 2041 by getting more renewable energy going. That's the plan.
Well, Rob, thank you so much for being here on Business of Story. And our thoughts and prayers are with you and Barney, and Godspeed on your trip down to the South Pole.
Well, thank you all very much. And, when it's a really, really, really cold day, I'll be thinking of you all and our great team Zero Mass in Phoenix, where it's probably 120 degrees. So let's dream about being hot when we're freezing cold. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. And thank you all for listening to this edition of the Business of Story. Join us next week when we will have another amazing story artist and potential explorer like Rob Swan here to help you craft and tell compelling leadership and brand stories that sell. Until then, if I can be of service to you, visit me over at businessofstory.com. And if you like what you're hearing here and would love to have more guests like Rob on the show, go to iTunes, give us your rating, make a note, and share it with your world. So thank you. And until next week, have a wonderful life.